Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man ihtada bihudah, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So today's presentation might be slightly different from what you might be used to. I'm not going to go into the depths of some of the rulings regarding zakat. We inshallah will cover the most important rules of zakat as well, but sometimes I think when we focus on the rules, we tend to forget the wider context of why are we doing it and what is zakat and what isn't zakat in the first place. So sometimes what happens is, we tend to miss the forest for the trees. And I think it's a good idea to take a step back and look at why exactly zakat is, is a fundamental pillar of Islam. What kind of role does it have? How does that apply in the modern world, especially in a post-caliphate world where we no longer have the khilafah, we no longer have a Muslim world essentially, and we have several nation states. A lot of us, apparently around a third of Muslims all around the world are living as minorities in non-Muslim lands. So all of these kind of dynamics have consequences, you could say. There's a ripple effect in terms of how we execute zakat today. So inshallah, today's seminar will be more about zakat in the modern world. So we'll cover zakat and things, more about the philosophy of zakat, more about the ideas of zakat and how things happen. Now, you might see here that the date is written as the 13th of April. So I initially delivered this seminar at a local mosque a couple of weeks ago. And the figures of the the prices of gold and the silver are fixed to that date. So I didn't update the figures on this on these slides. I wanted to get the slides out to you beforehand for those of you wanting to take notes or something. I don't want to change anything, and most people tend to, as far as I understand, pay their zakat, or they have their zakat anniversary towards the first half of Ramadan. Some people do give it in the last 10 days and things like that. But I thought these slides, I'll just keep them as they are, and I'll give you updated figures for today as well, inshallah. So just before we begin, we'll have a bit of a context as to what is zakat in the first place. Now, zakat isn't just a an annual chore or a an income tax of some sort. Sometimes Muslims tend to say, zakat is like a tax, fasting in Ramadan is a diet, and salah is an exercise. Islam, the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a lot more sophisticated than being reduced to, a medical diet or something like that. So I think we'll have to be a bit more, a bit more sophisticated about these things, and let's not reduce the ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the pillars of Islam, to something that just please a minority of people that we're not really interested in pleasing in this kind of way. So now Islam has many different aspects to it. It's not just about fasting and praying out 5 times salah. There's a lot of perspectives to it. We learn from the hadith of the muflis, the bankrupt person on the day of judgment, isn't going to be the person who who's never prayed salah, who's never fasted, and never paid the zakat. We learn that people who have performed lots of salah and given lots of zakat and lots of siyam, they're going to come with all of that on the day of judgment. He's going to have sworn at this person, killed this person, and violated the rights of this person. And we know all of their deeds will be given over to all of their good deeds will be given over to the people they violated, and if that runs out, then they're going to take on the other person's sins on their shoulders and be thrown into the fire. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us. But what we learn from there is there's a lot more to Islam than just a ritualistic attitude of I'll just pray my salah and that's done. How in certain parts of the world or certain mindset or certain philosophies, they call for the separation of the church and state, where your religion is basically just keep it to Sundays, keep it to the church, and that's about it. Everything else is going to be run in a very different way. We don't have that in Islam. So Islam is a lot broader than just going to the masjid for Fridays, going for Taraweeh in the evenings in Ramadan, and paying zakat every time we get adverts and every time people are talking about it in the month of Ramadan. It's a lot more than that. So essentially, zakat is part of Islam's model of socio-economic welfare. It's a lot more than just an annual payment of of alms, of charity. It is an entire economic philosophy. yeah, such that Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi is one of the leading scholars in the world right now from Egypt. He has a 900-page book, more than 900 pages actually, on the philosophy of zakat. He wrote this as part of his PhD thesis in the 1960s. So 60 years on from then, it's still one of the most important books on the wider philosophy of the economic philosophy of zakat. So it's, there is a social safety net for the people. It does try to alleviate poverty. Zakat does try to alleviate poverty, but it is a lot more than that. It is a lot more than that. Inshallah, we'll go into a little bit of these types of things. So zakat is not, a tax. Ultimately, it's primarily it's an ibadah maliyya. It's a monetary worship. And of course, it has, similarities with tax. It has similarities with, certain political models and things like that. But ultimately, it's not a tax. And this is important because, let's say you're living in a Muslim country and you've got a Muslim government and they impose taxes on you, and that tax will go to, let's say, fixing the roads, building the hospitals, and looking after the poor people, the widows and the divorcees, and just doing good things in the community and looking after the objectives of zakat are basically fulfilled through the taxes. It doesn't mean you're absolved from paying zakat. It doesn't mean that zakat is no longer necessary upon you. So even if taxes are being imposed on us, it doesn't mean zakat is completely independent of that. We still have to pay our zakat. So whether we're in Muslim countries or non-Muslim countries, it makes no difference here, because ultimately zakat is a monetary worship. It has that aspect as well, and we can never forget that. So it is a means of cleansing our wealth as well. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has called it awsakhun nas. This is the filth of the people. Now those who need zakat, they shouldn't worry about this. As in, if you need to take zakat, you can take the zakat. But those who don't need to take zakat, as in terms of receiving zakat, but you're eligible for it, but you don't really need to. Like, Muslims will tend to have a bit of pride and think, why should I take other people's awsakhun nas? Why should we take other people's wealth through which they're clarifying or cleansing their own wealth? That type of pride to have is okay. It's quite a positive type of pride to have, or it's like a dignity. I say pride in the English sense, not in the not in the Arabic sense of the term. So it is a means of cleansing our wealth. Those of us who pay zakat, sometimes if your wealth, let's say, is not 100% pure in how you've gone about gaining it, you can cleanse that by donating part of it in zakat, because a lot of it is ultimately it is the money that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. It's not our own earning in the ultimate sense of the term. So now, in terms of the virtues, we have a lot of virtues in the Quran and the Sunnah. Not as much as you find as you would expect, but there are a lot of generic verses like establish prayer and give zakat, establish prayer and give zakat. You find this repetitively in the Quran. But in terms of direct virtues, like if you give zakat, whoever gives zakat will get this and this reward, we don't actually find things like that in the strictest sense of the term, especially with the wording of zakat. But more generically, we do find a lot of virtues under the name of sadaqah, and zakat is a sadaqah as well, and under the name of spending in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So more generic wording is used. So for instance, we have here وَاكْتُبْ لَنَا فِي هَذِهِ الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ إِنَّ هُدْنَا إِلَيْكَ. So grant, is this a part of a dua? Grant us good things in this world and in the life to come. We turn to you. قَالَ عَذَابِي أُصِيبُ بِهِ مَنْ أَشَاءُ وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. And God said, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I bring my punishment on whoever I will, but my mercy encompasses all things. You might think, hold on, what's this got to do with zakat? So my mercy, who is it written for? فَسَأَكْتُبُهَا لِلَّذِينَ يَتَّقُونَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ بِآيَاتِنَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. I shall ordain my mercy for those who are conscious of God. So فَسَأَكْتُبُهَا, I shall write my mercy for those who are muttaqeen, for those who have taqwa, for those who are conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and pay the prescribed alms. So yu'tuna zakah here, alms as in ALMS, not ARMS. And people in our country have been unfortunately, targeted because of using this word. However, we're making it very clear here that it is a L and S. There is an L in the translation that we're using here. Who believe in our revelations, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ بِآيَاتِنَا يُوقِنُونَ, and those who believe in our signs, our ayat, our verses. So here we find that essentially those who pay zakat, those who, as part of other actions, they gain the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, there are a lot of virtues. I'm not going to go into all of them because we want to focus more on other things here. And in terms of warnings, we find a lot of warnings here as well. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْأَحْبَارِ وَالرُّهْبَانِ لَا يَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ وَيَصُدُّونَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. So believers, many rabbis and monks, meaning from previous traditions, wrongfully consume people's possessions and turn people away from God's path. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَالَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ وَلَا يُنْفِقُونَها فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. So tell those who hoard gold and silver rather than giving it in God's cause, that they will have a grievous punishment. What is that punishment? يَوْمَ يُحْمَى عَلَيْهَا فِي نَارِ جَهَنَّمَ فَتُكْوَى بِهَا جِبَاهُهُمْ وَجُنُوبُهُمْ وَظُهُورُهُمْ. On the day, meaning on the day of judgment, it is heated up in hell's fire, meaning the gold and silver will be heated up in hell's fire and used to brand their foreheads, their sides, their backs, and they will be told, هَذَا مَا كَنَزْتُمْ لِأَنفُسِكُمْ فَذُوقُوا مَا كُنْتُمْ تَكْنِزُونَ. This is what you hoarded up for yourselves. Now feel the pain of what you hoarded. So hoarding and just gathering and amassing a lot of wealth and not doing anything with it is condemned in the Quran directly. So sometimes a lot of people, especially in the modern day, tend to be not so much in the UK necessarily, but in other parts of the developed world, they tend to fall prey to the all sorts of binaries. Just like we have a deen and dunya binary, of religious secular binary, and in sectarianists will have a sectarian binary, and in the in places like America and things, people have unfortunately now have new sectarian identity, which is right-wing Muslims and left-wing Muslims, or those who are more communist or Marxist inclined, and those who are more capitalist inclined, and they defend these political ideologies in the name of religion, whereas Islam is obviously completely independent of all of that. Anyway, at least what we learn here is that those who have money, those who have been blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they have a privilege of wealth, then they do have a duty to spend that wealth, or at least part of that wealth, on to those who are less privileged. So it's not a case of this is my bread and butter, this is my bread and butter. My money is for me and not for anybody else. If somebody else wants that money, then they should work for it and things like that. It's not as simple as that. It's a lot more complicated. Human life is a lot more complicated. Society at large is very complicated, and this is why we need a model of economy that more accurately distributes, or more appropriately distributes wealth. That's a different topic for another day, inshallah. Now, who pays zakat? This is where we start getting into some of the laws or rulings of zakat. Essentially, in order for zakat to become fard on you, to become obligatory upon us as Muslims, there are criteria, like you have to be of age, you have to be mentally sane and things like that. But in terms of money and in terms of gold and silver and assets, business assets and things like that, there is a threshold that needs to be met. Assuming all other requirements of taklif are met, taklif in the sense of being accountable, being responsible. So those things that make somebody not responsible to perform salah, for example, then they wouldn't need to pay zakat at the same time. Those who for example, they might have let's say elderly people with a severe level of dementia, or young people who might have they might be on the autistic spectrum, then certain levels of that can make somebody not responsible or not accountable for salah and zakah and other types of ahkam from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But ignoring that, let's assume people who are neurotypical and they are healthy and they don't have any other any other excuse to not pay zakat, then essentially the threshold is, in the Hanafi school, there is slightly different, and the mainstream is slightly different. So the UK generally seems to be Hanafi. So in the Hanafi school, in the Hanafi school is generally 87.48 grams of gold, or 612.36 grams of silver, or its equivalent in currency, whether that's pounds or dollars or takas or rupees or riyals or anything else. So as of 2 weeks ago, or the 13th of April, this was £4,268 and 15 pence and £385 and 79 pence respectively. So as of today's threshold, this is £4,199 and 4 pence and £367 and 42 pence. This is according to today's Nisab. Now, of course, when you pay zakat, you should have your own anniversary of ideally, let's say you're a youngster in university, you don't have any money, and then now you've graduated and you finally got a job, and now you've started getting paid. You should mark the date when you reach this type of nisab and when zakat becomes fard on you, because the following year onwards, on that Islamic date, zakat will become fard on you. So it's important to know these types of things. Those who don't have that, or they can't calculate it because it's been so many years and people, there was mass ignorance in this regard, then of course people tend to just give in within Ramadan. But even then, you should just set a date, whether that's the 1st or the 5th or the 10th or whatever, and just stick to something like that for the entire year or for every year. Now, in the other schools, it's slightly different. They have 85 grams of gold and 595 grams of silver. And there are, reasons for these types of things. You generally find, Hanafis have different measurements and things like that because of the geographical locations of the schools. So another, common example is about, the measurements of a ritl and things like different measurements of volumes and containers at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the mainstream would say one thing because they look at the measurements of Medina, or the utensils and the buckets and things like that used in Medina, whereas the Hanafis were based in Kufa in Iraq. So they looked at Iraq's kind of utensils and buckets and measurements and judged things through there. So that's why measurements are slightly different over there. So the mainstream will say something else. So 85 grams of gold today is £4,080. And silver today is, or 595 grams of silver is 357 pounds. So this is based on gold being £48 per gram today and silver being 60 pence per gram today. And you can see obviously there's a huge disparity between those, and this is why it's quite important. We'll discuss that in the next couple of slides, inshallah. Now, just a quick tip is, if you're going to calculate your zakat yourself, or you're going to go to somebody, a scholar to calculate it for you, in the modern world, especially in the Western world, I would kindly advise everybody to, get a scale, a digital scale, or something that's quite accurate to 1 decimal point, and measure all of your gold, or your wife's gold, or anybody else's, and measure it in terms of grams, not in what in Bangladesh they call body, or in Pakistan and India they call tola, because what happens there is they're usually estimates, and then that estimated weight of gold is then converted into another estimated idea of how much that might be in gold in terms of grams, and then they pay zakat on that, or things like it. It's a bit of a mess. So what I would say is just gain certainty by just measuring it in a normal kitchen scale. And I've been to jewelry shops and things, they use the same types of things. It's only accurate to 1 decimal point anyway, so you could do that same kind of thing and just measure it in grams, and we can give you the value of gold to that day. Every single day we can give you an updated the value of gold, because it does fluctuate, whereas with body or with dollar and things like that, it's I can't do that. So I tell people in my own town as well that if you want to come to me to calculate your zakat, then please come to speak to me in my language. My language is in grams. I don't understand body and dollar and things like that. So in this kind of country, and this is why I would advocate anyway. So now once that threshold is met, once that £4,200, let's say, or that 350 odd pounds, 360 pounds is met, this is when Muslims will pay 1/40 of their savings, not their income. Yeah. So this is where it gets very, very different from income tax, was very different from, just any other type of payment. So this is specifically your savings after many deductions can be made here. So 2.5% in terms of percentages, or 1/40 in terms of fraction. So it's 1/40 for those of you who are good at mental maths. 1/40 is quite easy to calculate, because all you've got to do is just drop off the zero at the end, then half it, and then half it again. So let's say you've got £6,000 of money in your bank, or you total it up, just drop off the zero, you've got £600, that's 10%. Half that to 300, half that again, 150. So £150 is all you have to give. In terms of on a calculator, then even then a fraction is quite easy to calculate than percentages, because percentages you either have to do two sums or two calculations, or you have to get decimals involved, which is adds another complication. Whereas with 1/40, all you have to do is just divide it by 40. So let's say you have £6,000, just put 6,000 on the calculator, divide it by 40, and you've got the answer 150. So in the classical books, the reason I talk about 1/40 is because in the classical books it is done in fractions. And in the hadith as well, we find, for every 40 dinars, you give 1 dinar. So for every 40 gold coins, you give 1 gold coin. So because the numbers are like this, I think it's important not to, 2.5% is completely fine, but I think let's not forget about 1/40, because sometimes the decimals and the percentages can complicate things for different types of people. Of course, people calculate in different ways. The questions, I'll answer all of your questions at the end, inshallah. These are very important questions, but for the sake of keeping this seminar as short as we can, then we'll keep all the questions at the end. Usually I do like to have interactions and take questions during the middle of a class or something, but for those who will be watching a recording, or those who want to leave a bit earlier, out of respect for them, let's try to feel free to keep on writing your questions on the side, and we'll get to them when they get to them, inshallah. So essentially, once that threshold is made, this is when you contribute and to make the world a better place. It's not just about poverty. We'll get to that later on. Sorry, still. But yes, so as we saw, between £4,200 and 360 odd pounds, there is a huge difference. Yeah. So the reason for this is, in the past, you'll see silver was actually valued at about 10% of gold. So for example, if it was 20 mithqals of gold, then you'll have 200 dirhams of silver. These are different measurements or different sizes of the coins, different names for the same coins. So let's just say 20 gold coins or 200 silver coins, they were roughly of the same value. Sure, they'll fluctuate here and there, but it was roughly the same value. So you could say silver was valued at around 10% of gold. Yeah. And then what happened is, in the Americas, a couple of hundred years ago, they discovered more silver. They just found lots of silver, and obviously people can just arbitrarily just set what the value is and things. So that silver dropped to around 37 odd percent, or 37 to 1 in terms of its ratio. And then what happened is it dropped even more, and in the last 50 years it just completely dropped so much that it's no longer proportionate. So it's dropped to around 97 to 1, or roughly 1% of gold. So let's say £4,000 and £400, yeah, just to keep everything rounded. So £4,000 in terms of gold and £400 for silver. This is no longer proportionate. If you want to get an estimate of how much things would have costed, a few hundred years ago or even before that, then just get the silver's price and multiply it by 10 and give you a clearer idea. So let's say it's 300 and call it £360, times that by 10, £3,600. That gives you a clearer estimate in terms of what silver would have been valued like a few hundred years ago. So what we learn in terms of silver is that it's dropped so much, it's dropped dramatically. And in terms of gold, we find that with gold, you can buy, it was enough money to buy a goat. And if you can haggle well, then 2 goats you can get with that. So a goat today, or at least a few years ago, when an entire goat was around 120, 125 pounds. Yeah. So today, things can obviously change, but generally you can get an entire goat from your local butchers for roughly 120 odd pounds. Yeah. And one daily wage was around 1 gold coin. Yeah. So that does fluctuate. Obviously, gold, the price of gold fluctuates, but 2 weeks ago, this was equivalent to 213 pounds. So let's say at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how much were people getting paid, or as the average wage or salary, it was equivalent to 213 pounds per day. Yeah. So Muslim employers should look at this carefully, because sometimes they think you can pay your staff, 40 pounds a day, 50 pounds a day, and you think you've fulfilled the right. You haven't fulfilled the right. It's not a living wage by any standard. And if anything, you've given them around a quarter of what they're due. So in today's money, 120 odd pounds per day is roughly the national average in the UK as well, in terms of average salaries. Now, of course, the average salary is only average because there's so many people on low salary, and those who want extremely high salaries, they're they're in the top 5% or something like that. So it averages out to around that much. But really, if you look at, let's say, 213 pounds a day, and then calculate that, you'll probably be looking at least around 40, 50k job kind of thing in terms of modern equivalent. So it makes a bit of sense. Anyway, moving on. What we find essentially is, look, if gold in the past was around, let's say, 3,800 pounds, yeah, and gold now is around 4,200 pounds, it hasn't fluctuated that much. Yeah, the fluctuation is very minimal. But silver, let's say it's around a similar price. I can't remember what figure I put in here. And then silver now is around 3,600. This drop is it's a bit too big. Whereas here, the fluctuation is quite minimal. But the fluctuation here is significant. It's not in proportion with how everything else is happening. So the jurists, the fuqaha, have said in our books to generally select what is most beneficial for the poor. And what I mean by select is essentially what happens is you have gold coins and you have silver coins, which we don't have today. Let's say you've got gold coins and you've got silver coins. You've got gold money and you've got silver money. So then your gold will be according to gold nisab, and your silver will be according to silver nisab, and that's how you pay your zakat separately. Then what happened is you started having currency that's backed by gold or backed by silver. Yeah. So there you no longer pay things according to gold or according to silver, or the currency doesn't have its own nisab anymore. It's backed against gold or silver. Yeah. So then what happened is you essentially have a choice. Like, do you do it according to gold's nisab? Do you do it according to silver's nisab, or the threshold? Historically, it's always been a choice. Until today, it's still a choice. Yeah. So you can either go for gold if you want to. You can go for silver if you want to. There was absolutely no imposition on either way. What the fuqaha did recommend is this is just a principle. It's not a ruling or anything. It's a suggestion that they said, go for what is anfa' lil fuqara, what is most beneficial for the poor. So generally, imagine, if you got this kind of fluctuation, then whatever is lower, whatever is on the lower end, yeah, that's going to be most beneficial for the poor, because the more people pay zakat, the more poor people receive zakat. Just quite common sense. Yeah. But now, some people try to, so scholars do try to continue that into today and think, those who have the amount for silver, then they should, if they pay the zakat as well, then even more poor people will get zakat. However, I don't think that necessarily works, because it's dropped so much. What happens is the poor people who should be receiving zakat, they end up having to pay zakat. Yeah. So what happens is poverty goes under this line now, rather than under, say, this line. Yeah. So those who have only this much wealth, they're the only people who remain poor, because the threshold for being poor has changed. What about people, in all of this, are they not poor? Socially, we're going to consider them poor, because let's be honest about it. If your daughter, or sorry, if your if your daughter wants to get married, yeah, and you know the boy that she's chosen, he's only got, let's say, £400 in the bank. Yeah, are you going to get your daughter married to him? Are you going to let her marry him at that particular time? Yeah, I'm not talking about exceptional cases where, you know, things, whatever the case, you know, somebody at that type of, or let's say you've got a son and he's only got £400 and he comes up to you and says, well, you know, mom and dad, I want to get married. Yeah, but I don't have you know, this is how much money I've got according to Silver. I'm wealthy. Yeah, you know, would anybody take that seriously? And would you actually let your child, you know, get married at that kind of, you know, in that context? Most people wouldn't. Yeah, in terms of like, you know, your monthly bills and your, you know, cost of living in the modern world, 360 odd pounds is not really going to do a lot anyway. You can't, you know, go to a hotel for a couple of days or anything like it. You can't buy a car with that much. You can't do anything with that much, really. Yeah, like if we're honest about it, it's not a saving. If somebody's got £360 saving, you wouldn't call that a saving. Like you've just about got a, you know, a safety. It's hardly even a safety net at that price. So what I'm basically saying is, in terms of what is most beneficial for the poor, we might need to rethink that, because silver is no longer beneficial for the poor, because what that does is it imposes on the poor to pay zakat when they are actually eligible to receive zakat. So more beneficial today is not to go for silver anymore, because it's not fluctuation anymore, it's just completely depreciated. So if we go back to gold, so instead of paying it, instead of saying zakat is fard on us at £360, there's no zakat is fard only if you have £4,200. Yeah, then it's a bit more, you know, appropriate, because before that, you know, people have a bit of a chance to get up and, you know, build themselves up, or those who are struggling, they can actually receive zakat and things like that. And then when they are wealthy, you know, they can pay zakat, and it has consequences. If we go to silver, it has other consequences. For example, udhiyah, when it comes to Eid al-Adha, in the Hanafi school, it's wajib to what do you call it, sacrifice an animal. Yeah, in other schools it's not wajib, it's a sunnah or something, or you know, I'll let other scholars speak for themselves, but in the Hanafi school at least, it's wajib, it's necessary. So this is about, you know, having an entire, you know, having an amount of money for the entire year. If you happen to have £360 on that day, you're expected to spend, you know, £120 or something to slaughter an animal, and that's, you know, that's like a third of what you have. Whereas if you say no, Qurban is only wajib upon you once you've had £4,200, then, you know, given £100 here and there is not going to be much of an issue. It makes sense. Or like, it'll have consequences on Sadaqat al-Fitr as well. It has consequences on Mahr for nikah, for those who, you know, in some cultures, they insist on paying what Ali radiallahu anhu gave to Fatima radiallahu anha. As for why they do that, I'm not going to go into that, because I don't really believe it was a Sunni practice to begin with. But people do want to give what Ali radiallahu anhu gave to Fatima, or what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave to his wives, which is a slightly higher rate. So essentially what that boils down to in terms of silver, people believe it was only 560 odd pounds, 570 odd pounds. Whereas really, if you multiply that by 10, yeah, to give it a more of a proportionate value with how silver was valued before its dramatic depreciation, then 5,600 makes a bit more sense in terms of how it was valued. So in our Bangladeshi cultures, Mahr was historically given through gold and gold alone. Yeah, all gold and clothes and, you know, makeup and money and everything else as well. But generally, gold had an important part to play. So that altogether, it ranges around, you know, £5,000 to £7,000, or up to around £10,000 in modern day money. So a married Bangladeshi woman in Britain is typically should have around £6,000 of gold. Yeah. So again, in terms of Mahr and how things worked historically, it has its consequences. So if we put Mahr Fatimi as per the value of today's silver, you know, Muslim women might not get their, you know, get their end of the deal here. Whereas if you go back to, you know, time, multiply that by 10, in light of how silver was valued, you know, a few hundred years ago, let alone, you know, 1400 years ago, then giving somebody a mahr of around £5,500 to £6,000 would be a bit more honourable, and it seems to be in line with, you know, what we're looking at here. So what I'm essentially arguing for here is that, number one, you've got a choice anyway, yeah. But a lot of us Muslims tend to feel that no, it's only silver because our scholars have said it's only silver. It's not only silver. They were just given that as a, you know, as a working goal basically. But really, you have a choice, and we've always had a choice until today. That choice hasn't changed. But instead of focusing on silver, I believe we should go back to gold. And a lot of scholars have said this, both, you know, in the recent past as well as in the modern day. I'm not going to take everybody's names because some people are saying you're off record, but there are other scholars who are, you know, saying you're on record as well publicly. This is, you know, they've published it in writing, or they've come out recently and said it on video as well. Some people are using cautious terms like, you know, there is a leeway to, you know, use the gold nisab and things like that, but it's not really a leeway. You've got a choice. It's a very clear choice. So I'm advocating quite publicly here that, you know, we should return to gold because it makes a bit more sense. Now let's look at this. Gold and silver is only one type of nisab, yeah, or two types of nisab. There are other nisabs or thresholds for zakat to become fard on you as well, and that's through livestock, yeah. Generally in you know, zakat webinars or seminars and durus, we wouldn't really talk about, you know, animals in the modern day, just because we don't have, you know, in the UK or in the USA and things like that, you know, people aren't really farmers and, you know, having that kind of a context. So I would have generally left this out, but I kept this in here to show you something, and that is the threshold for livestock is, look at it, it's 40 goats, yeah, or 30 cows, or 5 camels. Now camels, I don't know how much camels cost. I couldn't get those figures anywhere, but 40 goats, if you look at how much 40 goats cost, it's around the £4,800 mark, you know, or 30 cows. I don't know how much that figure is, probably around £4,000 something pounds. Let's just call it £4,000, you know, clean £4,000, and 87 grams of gold is around what, £4,200. Yeah. So can you see here? It's quite similar. It's between the £4,000 and £5,000 mark, whereas silver is all the way down here. So this is why I think, you know, if we look at how goats, cows, and possibly even camels and gold have generally retained their value, you know, with minor fluctuations, but silver's gone all the way down. I don't think it makes sense to stick to silver anymore. So scholars like Shaykh Waliullah Muhaddith al-Dahlawi rahimahullah, Shaykh Waliullah is a very famous scholar of you know, undivided India, and, you know, from around 300 years ago, phenomenal scholar, mashallah. And he wrote that the wisdom in setting this amount of nisab is so, you know, somebody can run their entire house for 1 year. Yeah. Now, of course, let's just consider like before electricity, before internet, before fridge freezers, and, you know, all of these capitalist bills that we have, you know, on our shoulders. Let's just say in a normal life, you know, before all of that, or let's just ignore all the, you know, electricity, utility, gas, and all these kind of things. £4,000 for the year, you know, it does make sense. Like you can have, you know, in terms of your groceries and things like that, £4,000 would probably, you know, sustain a person or his household for the year. Or at least it's a better case to be made for £4,000 than £350, because £350 is barely going to last you a month. Yeah. So if you have £350 every month, yeah, then that makes a better sense, but that's going to equal the nisab of gold now. So essentially, the Sharia tells us that 40 goats makes you wealthy and you have to pay zakat, you know, implying that 39 goats or fewer will make you poor. Of course, it doesn't explicitly say that, but it's, you know, it's poor in the sense that you don't have to pay zakat. Yeah. So how can it be that those who have only 2.5, you know, the monetary value of 2.5 goats or 3 goats, you suddenly have to pay zakat? You're considered wealthy. You know, you don't have 40. You don't have the value of 40 goats. You have the value of, you know, very few goats. So the closest of these in value, you know, the cows and goats and things like that, is gold, because it's very similar. And silver has just dropped dramatically. So I don't think we should necessarily stick to that in the modern day. So just like Hajj, we say, you know, Hajj is for the wealthy. You know, the Hajj doesn't become fard on you at £300-400. It takes minimum like £4,000-5,000 if you're lucky to even find a package that cheap. Otherwise, realistically, you're looking at almost £7,000, £9,000 per head. So just like we say, Hajj is a deed for the wealthy, zakat is also a deed for the wealthy, and we can't impose zakat on the poor people. it just, it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit, doesn't it? So now in livestock, we've got those with 30 cows or 40 cows or 5 camels. Yeah, they have to pay zakat. They can't obviously receive zakat in that kind of with that kind of wealth, even though that wealth isn't monetary. They have that kind of wealth. So this is important to know, even if we doesn't really apply to us in the UK. It does apply when for those of us who discharge zakat in other parts of the world. So sometimes we think, look at Bangladesh or look at India, there's a lot of poor people over there. And no doubt there is definitely a lot of poverty over there, and a lot of people aren't eligible for zakat over there. However, just because somebody is your family member, or just because somebody is a friend, or had some friendship with your grandparents or something, and if they don't have monetary wealth, but they do have land, and they do have animals and things like that, other types of wealth, we do have to be careful in thinking, just because they're calling up at our houses and say, can you give me a zakat? Can you give me a zakat? It doesn't necessarily mean they're eligible to receive zakat. So we have to, be careful in this as well. Just because they don't have money or capital, it doesn't necessarily mean they don't have other types of wealth that the Sharia considers capital, even if we don't consider that in modern context today. So what is zakat due on? I think we'll cover that after a little break. We'll take a break for, of course, people pray Asr at different times. And those who want to perform the Asr now, feel free to go and pray Asr. And those who are, abroad, if you want to take a break or something, inshallah, we can do that. I can answer the questions now, but I think those, people will probably want to wait, or I'm not sure if people who are asked the questions probably want to go and pray as well. So we'll leave the questions until later, inshallah, and we'll just take a bit of a break. So Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. I should clarify here, one disclaimer, and I'll clarify something, inshallah. The disclaimer is that I'm not affiliated to GRTs. Now, GRT, mashallah, kindly organized this webinar, but I'm not affiliated to them. And even if I were, everything I'm saying within this seminar, it reflects only my own assessment of, or my own understanding of the laws of zakat and the idea and philosophy of zakat. It does not necessarily represent, the organizers or anybody else, nor does it represent any organization that I'm affiliated with, whether that's my employers, whether that's my Darul Uloom University or anything else like that. So please, if anybody finds anything controversial here, then attribute that only to myself and not to anybody else, please. Jazakumullah khair. And the other thing to clarify here was when I say I'm publicly advocating for gold, I'm not necessarily saying that acting upon silver is wrong. So those of you who aren't comfortable thinking, this is completely brand new, I've not heard of this before, and you're paying according to silver, and go ahead, continue with silver. I'm not here to impose gold on anybody. I'm just saying that there is a choice, and sometimes that choice, we tend to forget that there was a choice, or we are made to forget that there is a choice here. And I personally advocate we should go back to this. And there are other organizations there's an organization in America actually where they say $4,500 is the threshold. Anything below that, you're not you don't need to pay zakat. So there are other organizations and other scholars both in the UK and abroad who advocate this. I'm not the only one. But again, it's a choice, and it's not an imposition on any part. And those who want to stick to silver, Bismillah, you can go ahead and continue sticking with silver. My point is that those who feel like, I only have a little bit of wealth, and paying zakat at this kind of time it is quite difficult. Like, the cost of living is rising, everything else is rising, so many things are rising, but my salary isn't rising. And you end up in debt, you end up in all sorts of things happen. Then, all I'm saying is you don't need to feel bad about it, because we should just go back to gold, or just act upon gold. There's no harm in it whatsoever, and there's no reason to feel bad about it. But those who want to stick with silver, by all means, you can completely do that. It is a choice at the end of the day. And I thought I just wanted to clarify that. So now, what is zakat due on? Or what we call zakatable assets. Now, apparently zakatable, the word has always becoming a proper, a real word in English, and supposedly about to enter the English dictionary as well. So if that really is the case, then we'll be using that word as well, inshallah. Otherwise, formally, I'm not sure what the what other word we can use here. So in terms of zakatable assets, what you pay zakat on is all gold and all silver, including white gold. Yeah. So sometimes people think, oh, are we allowed to wear white gold? Do you pay zakat on white gold? White gold is still considered gold. And so all gold and all silver in your possession, if assuming you've met the threshold to pay zakat, you'll pay zakat on the gold and the silver. All paper currency, all paper currency, including money that's stored in the bank or somewhere else or under the bed. It's not just in your pocket or something. Any paper currency that is within your ownership, you will pay zakat on. Yeah. And when I say in your ownership, this includes loans. So if you've loaned people things, so others owe you, so others are indebted to you, yeah, then you pay zakat on that loan as well. Yeah. Debt is a bit different. If you owe somebody else money, then that money doesn't belong to you, it belongs to somebody else. So we'll get to debts later, inshallah. Now, if you've given somebody a substantial loan and you don't have enough money to pay zakat on that, then, or you can't afford to pay it at that particular time, you can wait until you receive it. And once you receive it, you either backtrack it for those years or you give it only on the year that you had it. There are different opinions on this, but the more cautious one would be you backtrack it for all the previous years because it is your wealth at the end of the day. Now, if in debt, or if you've given somebody a loan and he's basically done a runner with it, you're never going to get that wealth again. You're not going to get that again. Yeah. So it's just, you've lost your friendship, you've lost everything, you've lost your money, you've lost everything. So if it's unlikely that the borrower will ever pay you back, and you don't have any reasonable certainty or any guarantee, you don't trust the person to give it back to you, then you won't need to pay zakat on that missing wealth. You'll just consider it like stolen wealth that you've lost. This wealth is, you had it one day and you don't have it another day, so this is no longer your wealth essentially. So you could consider it like that. If you miraculously somehow get paid back, or you find that missing wealth again, then you will pay zakat, but you wouldn't need to backtrack it for the previous years that you haven't paid it on. Now, another thing you pay zakat on is business stock. Yeah. Now, business stock is an important one for those of us who, you end up in some kind of business, whether you start off a traditional business or even a digital business, you will pay zakat on the business stock. So this can happen in many ways. So essentially, let's say anything that you purchase with the intention to sell, or anything you produce with the intention to sell, you will pay zakat on that stock calculated at the market price. Yeah. So let's say you're an artist. Yeah. Let's say you're an artist and you paint, and you've got several paintings that you're charging for, let's say £2,000 per painting. Yeah. Now, this is not the same as, on Instagram when people want canvases and they place an order for, £10 or £50 or something, and you produce it and give it to them. Yeah. So that's different. That's more of an instant thing. Let's consider like traditional artists, where you produce something and you have several, let's say you've got 10 pieces of art, all for £2,000 each, and you're basically wanting to sell them. You will pay zakat on all of that £20,000. Yeah, not on the price of the canvas, the price of the painting, and things like that. Yeah, the price of the paintbrush and the paint and things like that. There is no zakat on the tools. Or let's say you're a car dealer and you have cars, then all the cars that you have to pay zakat on the market value that you're selling it for. The market value of all of those cars together, you'll pay to 1/40th or 2.5% of all of that. This counts for, same thing for houses, same thing for meat and chicken, same thing for everything. Anything you buy with the intention to sell, even if you're, let's say, a restaurant owner and you sell food. Now, you wouldn't price it at cooked food, as part of a meal. You'll pay zakat on the food that you have as it is. So let's say you've got frozen chicken or frozen meat, then how much is that at market price? Yeah, that's what you'll basically sell your, that's what you'd pay zakat on, and obviously your income and your, all these other things as well. This includes stocks and shares. So if you're an investor and you digitally invest in all these apps and all these fancy businesses, your stocks and your shares, you will have to pay zakat on that, and that includes cryptocurrency. Now, cryptocurrency, contemporary scholars do differ with regard to the ruling on cryptocurrency with 3 opinions. So I'm not going to go into that because it's irrelevant to here. Here is about if somebody does engage in trading with cryptocurrency, or not just trading, but investing in cryptocurrency. Of course, they're going to do that, assuming it's halal anyway. They're going to do that, or at least I would like to think that you would only invest in cryptocurrency following an opinion of those scholars who permit it. Now, of course, cryptocurrency may be permissible. There's certain coins you have to look into and things like that. I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to be speaking about giving anybody financial advice here. But with regard to the laws of cryptocurrency, or assuming somebody trades or invests in cryptocurrency, you will pay zakat on cryptocurrency as well. Cryptocurrency will not have its own nisab, its own threshold, but what you will do is consider it like an asset, like a business asset, and thus you'll calculate its value in light of the price of gold or whatever. So in British pounds, or whichever country you're living in. So in the UK, it'll be British pounds. How much have you invested and what is that worth in terms of British pounds on the day of your zakat anniversary, and you'll pay accordingly. So even when it comes to NFTs and things like that, with NFTs, it completely depends. Generally, there wouldn't be any zakat on NFTs if you've just bought it and you just want NFTs for the sake of your profile picture on Twitter or something like that. But if you buy NFTs for the sake of selling it, you buy NFTs for the sake of selling them at a higher price or something, then it becomes a business stock. So then it's just the same as I bought a car for £2,000 and I want to sell it for £3,000. It's the same thing now. So if you buy NFTs as business stock, then it will become zakatable, and you will have to pay zakat on NFTs as well. There are other things like, do you pay zakat on the metaverse and things like that? That one I don't have an answer to, so I don't have an answer. I think there are other scholars out there who do have answers, but because it's not really out here yet, and I haven't managed to have a conversation with them about this topic, so I don't know how that's going to work in the metaverse. So now, what about non-zakatable assets? What do you not give zakat on? Obviously, you don't give zakat on pretty much everything else, but there are things that people tend to get a bit confused about, or have a kind of a doubt about. In the Hanafi school, at least, there's no zakat on precious stones like diamonds and rubies. So even if you have a ring, let's say you've got a wedding ring or an engagement ring, and it's like 5 grams of silver or something like that, but you've got an entire kilogram or a whole ton of diamond on it, it doesn't matter. You'll only pay zakat on that 5 grams of gold or 5 grams of silver that you have. That diamond or that ruby or whatever stone you've got on top of it, it doesn't, it can weigh a ton, it can weigh several kilograms, no problem. There's no zakat on it, unless of course you're buying diamonds for the sake of business, for the sake of trade. So yeah, this includes stones on rings and things. In some other madhahib, like the Shafi'i school, for example, there's no zakat on women's jewelry. In the Hanafi school, you do pay zakat on jewelry, and in at least the Shafi'i school, and I'm assuming probably the others as well, but I haven't I've only spoken to a Shafi'i scholar here. So the jewelry that is either worn, so the lady wears, or is wearable, that jewelry you wouldn't need to pay zakat on. But if it's jewelry that's not wearable anymore, like something that's broken, you've had a necklace and it's broken, you've had a bangle and it's broken, you've had whatever, but it's no longer wearable, that gold you'll have to pay zakat on, or at least in the Shafi'i school. However, the Shafi'i scholar I spoke to, he said, he personally acts upon the Hanafi school here and pays zakat on his wife's gold. So it looks like, people are doing these types of things. So sometimes, my point is that there is a difference of opinion here. There is that flexibility here. So, if somebody is struggling like financially and they end up in a situation where they can't afford to give zakat on their gold, or they don't need to give zakat monetarily anyway, but because of the gold they have to pay zakat, and it gets to a point where you're going to have to sell off your gold, and it's like, you've got a sentiment, this is like my wedding gold and things like that, then there may be scope to adopt another school's position on here. Obviously you can speak to your local scholars about whichever scholars you trust in terms of this, can you switch a madhab, can you switch a school based on this predicament that you have, based on this sensitivity that you have. and you can take it accordingly. But there is scope for something like this happening. Wallahu a'lam. Now, there are things that you can deduct as well. Some of these things even though you can technically deduct, you don't have to deduct these things, especially when some things are just of very little consequence. But essentially, what you can deduct is any bills that are necessary, or any bills that you've paid in the past and things. Obviously, that's all gone. You don't have that money anymore. But let's say today, the 24th of Ramadan is your zakat date, is your zakat's anniversary, and last year you paid on the 24th. Today you want to pay on the 24th. What you can do is all of your necessary expenditure for the coming year, you can deduct everything for the coming 12 months. So let's say nowadays, water, gas, and electricity, these utility bills are considered, basic human necessity, basic human need. Those types of things you can deduct for a full 12 months. Yeah. And you can deduct that. So let's say you've got, I don't know, £20,000 in your bank, and your bills are going to be, £3,000 for this, £2,000 for that, something else, and then you can deduct that. You have a total of £15,000, and you pay zakat on only on that. You can do this. So rent and council tax as well. So housing is a necessity, of course, and council tax is something you have to give by law here. So you don't really have a choice about that. Those types of things you can deduct. Car insurance, because you have to, as in, again, you can deduct that as well for next year's. In your fuel costs, of course, you can do those as well. Now, phone and Wi-Fi bills, I believe you can deduct these, and I've said this for several years actually. And I have spoken to people about, some people who hold a different opinion. Not necessarily because of their acumen or something, but people do feel like, this is a necessity, this is a necessity. I spoke to people before lockdown, so this was before COVID, before the pandemic and things like that. I believed right from then it is a necessity. It's become a necessity now. Yeah, I'll make the case for that, inshallah. But people do feel that it isn't a necessity, and you don't have to, you can't deduct it. So if somebody does feel that I don't want to deduct, I'm not comfortable with that, no problem. It's not going to make much of a difference anyway. So let's say you've got a bill of, I don't know, let's just say £10 a month, yeah, just to make it, or let's call it £20 a month. Let's say you've got a phone bill of £20 a month, and for 12 months that adds up to £264, then that'll basically be £6 of zakat. Yeah, so even if you deduct it, it's going to deduct £6 of your zakat. It's not going to make much of a difference anyway, especially if you're paying, in the hundreds. So you don't have to do these kind of things. However, I do feel that just like electricity didn't exist in the past, but it's become a foundational part of everyday life in the modern world. And phone, or mobile phone and Wi-Fi, even though it didn't exist in the past, it has become a fundamental part of modern day life. And this was long before the pandemic. Realistically speaking, some people will say things like, "Oh, you shouldn't give your children phones until they're like 16 or something." But let's say you've got a 13-year-old girl, and she's going to secondary school, or she's going to whatever. Would you let your daughter go out of the house without a phone? Yeah, like, really, would you do that? I mean, when I delivered this seminar in our local masjid, everybody would, no way you're going to let your daughter, walk around without a phone like that. Let's be honest about it. It has become a necessity. It's not. We're not living, in times where phones were luxuries. They are necessities now. Wi-Fi was a, having, broadband internet was a necessity, or was a luxury. It's a necessity now. Now, especially after the pandemic, I don't think anybody can, argue compellingly against what I'm saying here, especially when people are working from home and Wi-Fi has become a necessity, and your phones have become a necessity. So it's a necessity. So without internet, you can't work. Or for children who are in schools, they cannot do their schoolwork without logging on to the internet, without logging on to Zoom, without logging on to Google Classrooms or whatever it is. Internet has become a necessity, and even individual laptops, individual computers and devices and tablets, you can make a case for necessity like that as well. So I would say whether it's a necessity or not is not the question. The question is it a basic your requirement for your living costs? It is part of your living costs, therefore you can deduct it. However, you don't have to deduct it. So it's not an imposition, I think, but those who do want to deduct it, they absolutely can. However, in terms of like non-essential bills, so non-essential subscriptions, like for example, streaming services, there are tons of streaming services out there, $5.99 for this one or $7.99 for this one or something like that, and they can add up as well. You can't deduct those, because that's not part of your, it is recreational activity. I'm not saying recreational activity is necessarily bad or anything, but it's not your fundamental, it's not a haja bashariya, as we say. It's not a need for the human being. So even home insurance is not it's not mandated by the government or anything, and there is a from a Sharia standpoint, scholars have questioned whether it's permissible or not in the first place. So things like that you can't deduct. So if somebody has home insurance, or they've taken out home insurance and they're paying that on a monthly basis or something, you can't deduct those. You still have to pay zakat and things on those types of bills. Now debts, remember a couple of slides ago we did loans, so you have to pay zakat on money that you've loaned to others. Now debts that you've taken from others, when you've taken loans from others, that you can deduct no matter how large it is. No matter how large it is, you can deduct that, all of it. So let's say you've got £15,000, but you owe somebody £30,000, you can deduct all of that, and technically your balance is minus £15,000, or in America negative $15,000 or whatever it is. You can technically receive zakat now to pay that off. You don't. It's not. You don't need to. You don't need to pay zakat on that, essentially. Now, as for long-term debts, what I mean by that is not like a £30,000 that's naturally going to take a long time to pay off. Not those ones. Long-term debts in the ones that are expected to be paid back in installments, over many years. For example, a mortgage, Whether mortgage is a halal or haram is a different discussion. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about the implications of a mortgage. So those who have taken out a mortgage, whether mainstream or non-mainstream, generally there is an expectation that you pay over several months over the course of 20 or 25 odd years. So now there are different opinions here of some will say you can't deduct anything at all because it's not permissible or something. Others would say you can only deduct up to 12 months worth, not more than that. And others would say no, because it's a debt, no matter how large, you can deduct all of it. So the general fatwa in the UK seems to be that you can deduct only 12 months worth, and this is what generally the muftis and the scholars are saying in the UK. So let's just say you're paying, I don't know, 700 odd pounds per month, and that adds up to, let's say, £10,000 for the year, and you've got £20,000, lying around. You can deduct that £10,000 of your next year's mortgage and pay zakat on the remaining balance. But according to the other view of you can deduct everything, then you can deduct all of that. And, if you're technically in debt, you're technically in debt, and you can receive zakat to pay that money off. So now both of these are valid fatwas, but because this is the generic one that's given in the UK, this is the only one I've included in the slides here. So now we've covered who pays zakat and how do they pay and what they pay it on and not on. Now, who receives zakat? This one's a very important one. And in the modern day, especially in the UK and things, it has consequences, especially when we're talking about the silver and gold distinction. That has consequences in terms of who can receive zakat. So I'm not going to define things like, who are the poor, who are the needy and things like that. I'm not going to define it because, everybody has different definitions for these types of things. And some of them are more, or some of them you could say are less practical than others. So I'll just leave those for, you can speak to a local scholar or somebody you trust about those things. So now there are 8 categories of zakat here. Now this is quite important. So I'll read the Arabic. I'll got the translation here as well. So إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريضة من الله والله عليم حكيم. That alms or zakat or sadaqat are meant only for, number 1, the poor, and number 2, the needy. So you could translate those in other ways and stuff as well, depending on, again, the poor and the needy. Who are they? Who is a faqir? Who is a miskin? Everybody's got different definitions for all of those. So these are these are two of the 8 categories. So they're not the only 2 categories, as many of us are led to believe that zakat is only for the poor, is only for the needy. And I'll share some thoughts on this as well. Those who administer them, yeah. So I've got an entire slide about this at the end, inshallah. Sorry, that's I'm supposed to underline that. So I've got a slide about this at the end, and we'll try to, if we have time, we'll cover that, inshallah. Those whose hearts need winning over, this is mu'allafati qulubuhum. We'll cover this as well, inshallah. Now, there are a few things about this actually, yeah, that I'll say. So some things are, for example, we'll cover in the next slides about where it can be done and what types of people it can be given to. Now, in the contemporary context, so some organizations give zakat to people under this category that I'm not entirely comfortable with. So what happens is, I'll explain this later, inshallah. If I forget, then please remind me, but I'll just make a note here, is they give it to the mu'allif, not the mu'allaf or mu'allafati qulubum. So sorry. So I'll just make that note here. If I forget, then somebody please remind me. And to free slaves. So this is number 5. The Arabic is wafir riqab. Riqab basically means necks. So the translator is translated as slaves. Others have translated it more accurately, perhaps, as those in bondage. Yeah, those in bondage. So generally that would mean slaves. And other scholars have extended that to, or not necessarily extended it, but they include captives in there as well. So prisoners. So even if slaves might have become redundant in the modern world, it might not have, because slavery, perhaps illegally, it does exist elsewhere in the world. And but captives and Muslim prisoners and things like that certainly still exists. So in this category, it can be extended in that way to help those in debt. Well, so people who are in debt can receive zakat as well. Yeah. So whether they should ethically take zakat is a different question. For example, if they're wealthy and they can pass it, they can pay it off, or let's say the reason they're in debt is because they don't know how to handle money, and if you give them the zakat money, they still going to squander that and not pay off their debt. Ethically, that's a different question. But so I'm not talking about exceptions here. We're just talking about the concept, the philosophy. Those who are in debt and they can't afford to pay off their debt and they want to pay off their debt, they can receive zakat and they can pay off their debt. That's not only in the poor countries, this can happen in, right here in Britain as well. And for God's cause, this is another important one, وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Now here, there are a few understandings of this. So one obvious one, or one of the common ones that the scholars of tafsir and others have given is the military. Yeah, so the Muslim military, mujahideen, so those who are engaged in jihad, and not just the jihad, also those, well, part of all of that is those who guard or safeguard the boundaries of the the Muslim state, or where the tents of the mujahideen are, and the entire boundaries, so people don't attack or whatever happens. So the ribat, you could say, the safeguarding the army and safeguarding the the entire Muslim military. That's one of the understandings of fi sabilillah, who falls into that category for God's cause or in the path of Allah. And another one people have given was Hajj and Umrah. Yeah. So the first one was jihad, and the second one is Hajj and Umrah. So these are early opinions. These are, at least in Tafsir al-Qurtubi, Imam Qurtubi rahimahullah attributes it to the companion Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, and there are later scholars as well who have said the same thing. And in the a Hanbali friend of mine was saying, in the mashhur position of the Hanbali school, is that Hajj and Umrah is also included in that as well. Now, beyond that, some contemporary scholars, or a number of contemporary scholars, have extended that even further for all types of good causes, anything that's religious, and like giving it to students of knowledge and other kind of projects and things. I'm not entirely comfortable with advocating this yet, so I wouldn't say something like this. A lot of scholars have very, very passionately condemned this as well, and saying this is completely wrong. This is not a tenable position. So at least in terms of majority and minority, the majority position does seem to be to, just keep God's cause for the Mujahideen, basically, and not extend that beyond it. However, there are scholars who do that, and wallahu a'lam, I'm not comfortable enough to validate that or invalidate that at this current moment in time. But what we do find is there are early opinions about jihad and the Mujahideen and those who safeguard the boundaries and for going for Hajj and Umrah. So some people do say the Hajj and Umrah is only if they don't have money and they're poor, which doesn't necessarily make sense because the poor is already here anyway. So this is another thing that sometimes we find. Some schools, they restrict, for God's cause and for, those whose hearts need winning over, they restrict it to the poor people. But it doesn't really make a lot of sense because the poor is already here anyway. So the same way that widows aren't mentioned, in these 8 categories, we don't find widows, we don't find orphans, whereas a lot of orphans can be poor, a lot of widows can be poor. So they can still receive zakat under the category of poverty. But what's the need for mentioning these other categories? So those who administer them, so they basically take a salary, or at least in the classical context, someone says a salary or a wage for the thing, or others will say this is basically a payment for whatever. This is not about poverty, and everybody agrees on this one. But even the others, it's like, if you're going to restrict everything to poverty, then in my opinion, it doesn't really, it's not that convincing. I don't find it entirely convincing. So especially in the Hanafi school, for example, they consider this one abrogated and no longer suitable for practice. So what I don't really understand is if those who consider it unsuitable for practice, or this is abrogated, no longer allowed to practice, then, perhaps you shouldn't really be speaking about the laws of it either and restricting it to, can the poor, can wealthy ones, can only the poor receive it, or can the wealthy ones receive it as well? It's like, according to you, it's abrogated. So, maybe we should let other people who believe in this permissibility talk about this. So, freeing slaves, helping God cause, so they say, those in Hajj and Umrah, or those who are going for Hajj and Umrah, only the ones who are poor can receive it, which doesn't really make sense because they're validated under this one anyway. And the last one, for travelers in need. So that traveler in need is basically those who are traveling, and they might be wealthy in their home country, but while they're traveling, their ration basically runs out, their wealth runs out and everything. They become temporarily poor, even though they've got money elsewhere. So they can receive zakat as well because they're technically poor. Even in the modern world, this can happen as well. But generally, because of banks working internationally and things like that, it is quite unlikely. But it's possible in theory. Especially like, those who went on holiday before the pandemic and they got completely stuck. I have a non-Muslim friend who I went to school with, and he actually went to America before the pandemic, and then he was stuck over there for lockdown. So he had around 30 or £1,000 or something with him, and that dropped all the way down to around £1,000. So if he were Muslim, let's say, then in theory he would drop to below much, let's say zakat is around £4,000, he's dropped to £1,000. So if he's poor and struggling, even though he might have money in the UK, I don't know if he had money in the UK or not, technically he may be eligible for zakat in theory. I'm just hypothesizing here. Another thing, by the way, for God's cause, those obviously this counts as towards military as well. And one of my friends, we were discussing this. He was thinking out loud, or he was hypothesizing that in the modern world, this could perhaps extend to armies of Muslim countries. So military armies of Muslim countries, because we don't have a central caliphate anymore. We don't have a khilafah anymore, where this is the army or the mujahideen of the Muslim, ummah, you could say. So these are individual Muslim states. Can zakat money be funded for their, their weapons and their arms with an R this time, and the tanks and everything else? There may be scope to, extend this for the armies of Muslim countries. Wallahu alam, and that would be a decision for the governments to make in light of, with consultation of their scholars, of course. So wallahu a'lam. So this is ordained by God. Fariidatan min Allah. This is ordained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah is all knowing and all wise. So now those whose hearts need winning over, so this is what we're talking about. Yeah. So in the Hanafi school, this is not this, they consider this mansukh or abrogated. And the reason they say this is because of an incident with Umar radiallahu anh, when he was the caliph. What happened is, I think somebody must have asked for money and say, oh, I'm part of the mu'allafati qulubuhum. We'll define what that is. So he wanted it, and actually I'll define it first. Actually, those whose hearts need winning over, there are 4 types of those. Yeah, so I've taken this from Ibn al-Jawzi's his tafsir, what's it called, Zad al-Masir fi ilm tafsir, very nice tafsir, mashallah. So essentially the mu'allafat al-qulub divides into Muslims and non-Muslims. Yeah, then of the Muslims you've got 2 types, and of the non-Muslims you've got 2 types. So of the Muslims you've got those who are weak in faith. Yeah, so they're a bit, fluctuating in the thing, like, kind of like glory supporters, you could say, but I don't want to use the word glory supporters, but it's those who are, quite weak in the faith, they're not completely stable yet. So you'd give them money to strengthen their intentions, basically. So it's like to entice them to kind of like, how some shops give you discount vouchers or loyalty points and things like that. It's you could say it's kind of a similar concept. It's not bribery. Yeah. So in the UK, I'll get to that mu'allif thing shortly, inshallah. Why they switched to the mu'allif and not the mu'allaf, but it's essentially, it's not bribery, or this concept is not bribery. Bribery is completely haram in Islam, and this would be no exception. This isn't a type of enticement. This is a type of like loyalty or something like that. This is completely fine, even within UK law as well. So then you have those Muslims who are strong in their faith, but they have non-Muslim families and tribes and things like that who are still hostile to the deen. So giving it to them is like a gesture of affection for their tribes. Yeah, ta'allufan liqulubil, ashairi, you could say. And then you've got non-Muslims. Yeah. And of the non-Muslims, you've got those who hurt Islam, hurt Muslims, those who abuse the Muslims, yeah. So they can be given zakat money to end their abuse, to stop harming the Muslims, yeah. And then you've got others who, they're not Muslim yet, but they're kind of inclined towards Islam. They're kind of on the fence, or looking from the sidelines. Then you could give it to them as a gesture to encourage them to come into Islam. It's a lot nicer than you might be thinking. If you're on the fence, just go ahead and come with it. Now, of course, this entire thing is a slippery slope, but we'll get there. So Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah gives examples of those who are weak in faith and giving it to them for strengthening their intentions. It was like Uyayna ibn Hisn and Al-Aqra radiallahu anhuma. And a Muslim who was strong in his faith, but he had non-Muslim families and tribes, like Adi ibn Hatim radiallahu anhu. He was an example who was part of the mu'allafati qulubuhum. So sometimes if you find this companion was from the mu'allafati qulubuhum, you don't need to automatically assume that they were weak in the faith, because it could be this category as well. And then you've got non-Muslims, those who wanted to hurt Islam and abuse the Muslims, basically, like Amir ibn Tufail. This is the example they give. And those who were inclined towards Islam, but not necessarily Muslim yet, and were part of the mu'allafati qulubuhum, Safwan ibn Umayyah. So these are examples that at least Ibn al-Jawzi offers for people who receive zakat, or they were from the mu'allafati qulubuhum. So now this is important to know, because there are Muslim organizations who have given some zakat money to this category of people. Yeah, and this caused a lot of controversy in a couple of years ago. And what happened is, people feel a lot of, they get emotional and feel very sensitive about these topics. But what happens is, because we're not familiar with the broader categories of zakat beyond the poor and needy, yeah. And another thing is, because a lot of people would be Hanafi and they don't believe in this category to be valid to act upon today. So naturally, you're going to feel a bit, it's something you're not used to. You've been thinking about zakat for 30, 40 years of your life to only be for the poor and needy. But here you're giving the zakat institution is giving it to wealthy people who actually hurt Muslims. So this is at least according to the majority of those who believe this category to be completely permissible to act upon, this was a valid category, and this still is a valid category. So, we shouldn't necessarily criticize zakat institutions for giving zakat to this category of people, yeah. Or at least if you feel like, I don't want my zakat money to go to people who are abusing the Muslims of Palestine and things like that, then feel free to give your zakat elsewhere. Yeah. Or select another category or something like that. Is completely fine as well. You don't have to give it to this category of people. In the Shafi'i school, of course, they have to give to all 8 categories of recipients. But of course, most will probably in this category will probably stick within the Muslims anyway. Allahu a'lam. But my point is, all of this is, there is a nuance here. Now, one of the more controversial things, which I personally don't agree with, and is something but I feel I should tell you about it anyway, is the mu'allif. So this is not a category, or that at least I've never come across it in history either. So I'll just write it down. Mu'allif. So what these zakat institutions would do, and again, I'm not criticizing anybody here. I'm friends with some of the scholars who run different institutions or work for different institutions, both scholars and non-scholars and things. So all Muslims are considered to be my own brothers and sisters, regardless of whether they share my ethnicity, share my madhab, share my whatever geographical location, whatever the case is. All of them are my people. So I'm not going to look at people as these are my Muslims and these are your Muslims. No, everybody's my Muslims. So any criticisms I am making, I intend it in the best interest of myself and themselves and the Muslims at large. So I'm not criticizing as an outsider. I'm wanting to help from within. I think people have a right to know this. So now, because giving money to for this category of people, it can be considered, or it can be looked at as a form of bribery. So what some people have done is, some organizations have done is they've created a model, and I admire the creativity, but not necessarily from the legal perspective. What they've done is they give money to, let's say, an imam or an activist or an organizer or something who can organize a da'wah event. For example, the famous Visit My Mosque Day that happens across the country. Fantastic initiative, mashallah. But they give the money to the imam or to the organizer or to whoever else to host this event, to call people to Islam, to show them the beauty about Islam and Muslims and the mosque and things like that. But they give it to them from zakat money under this category of mu'allafati qulubuhum. However, they are not mu'allafati qulubuhum, or they don't fall under any of these 4 categories. So what they say is, because we can't act upon mu'allafa specifically because of allegations of bribery, then what we do is give it to the mu'allif to then feed back to this. So I'm not entirely convinced by this, even though they're my friends who have done this. But I think it's important to know what is happening, what's not happening, and those of you who feel this is, I trust these people. I trust these scholars. Of course, they're not just normal people. They are very, very competent scholars, mashallah. If you trust them, then that's completely fine. But those who are not, those who are a bit more skeptical about it, feel free to, be aware of this and give your zakat elsewhere. That's completely fine as well. I just thought it's, I haven't seen this be discussed publicly in this kind of way, or especially from the scholarship to a lay audience. And I try to be that bridge in between, inshallah. So I hope I've made that clear enough, inshallah. So now, who can apply to receive zakat? Here, this is a long topic, and I don't really have all the answers, but there is an interesting hadith that I think is worth looking at. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but what we will look at is just 1, 2, and 3, inshallah. So these essentially, I've used the wording of applying for zakat, or applying to receive zakat, or asking for money. And the reason I said that is to maintain a bit of dignity, and I don't want to call it begging, because generally people do call it begging, but begging has different connotations, and it has a very demeaning kind of, it has a negative connotation. So we'll just call it begging for the sake of this hadith, or asking for money. So essentially, there are three types of people that the Prophet ﷺ said begging is permissible for. So it's not permissible except for one of 3 types of people. One is the one who's in debt, so he can beg or ask for money until it's paid off. The second one is somebody who's been afflicted with a disaster such that all of his wealth has been destroyed, or the bulk of his wealth has just been destroyed. For example, let's say you're a farmer, you've got crops and things like that, and there's been a bushfire and it destroyed everything. Or you've got money in your house and things, and you've had a flood, a tsunami, or something that's happened, and everything's destroyed. Those types of situations. Or so he can beg until he receives something that's a reasonable living. And number three, person who's been afflicted with poverty, such that three intelligent people will testify that, you know, he's not making it up, he's not winging it, he's not just asking, you know, for no reason. This person is genuinely afflicted with poverty, so he can receive, you know, beg or ask for money as well. Now, in the modern world, what happens is you don't, or at least in the UK, you know, people don't beg like how they do in Bangladesh and things like that. If I were to ask you, actually, how many of you know somebody in the UK who have received zakat or received zakat money? Yeah, the bulk of you probably don't know a single person who's done that. Yeah, it's because people in the UK, Muslims in the UK, will have a bit more pride, they'll have a dignity, they'll maintain these kind of things private. They wouldn't tell you, even if you're a close friend or family member, but they'll apply to zakat institutions and say, you know, I am eligible for zakat. You can feel free to check, to assess my situation. And, you know, this is how much money I'm in need of, or whatever, and they receive zakat in that way. So it's a very dignified kind of way to go about it. And I think it's important to know about the levels of poverty and, you know, the gold and silver and these kind of things, because it affects real people. So by sticking to silver, you'll prevent real poor people in the UK from receiving zakat, and instead making them pay for it. Whereas once we go back to gold, then people who are genuinely struggling, they can actually receive zakat money as well. And you know, so there's two sides of that coin, essentially. So that's why I said applying for zakat rather than begging. Now, in the UK Muslim charity sector, there are a few other things. Inshallah, after this will end, unless we can skip this, and you can basically read it yourself, and we could do a Q&A. I'll just ask Brother Abdul Hay what he feels we should do. There's only four slides, essentially. We can just quickly go through this, or if you want, we can go to the Q&A now, because I am 10 minutes above what I expected it to go to. So Brother Abdul Hay, let me know what you think, inshallah.
I think Jazakallah khair for that. So I think it's fine, inshallah. You can go through that brief, I think, if it won't take too long. But I think another thing that if you could touch upon is that based on the questions that I receive a lot, is people often think that zakat, you only pay zakat on what you've earned in 1 year, in from the previous year to the current year, rather than the entire wealth. So I think that's something which if you could address as well, inshallah, and then just the questions that people have, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
No problem. So if you could just type that question into the box, inshallah, I'll get to it when we get to it. So, you know, there are a few things that become slogans or become, like, you know, people have very passionate views about in the modern world, when I don't think they always understand it properly. So some of those things, I think, let's try to go through them. And this is more thinking out loud or having discussions with people in the charity sector and things like that, rather than an assessment, or rather than passing a judgment on anybody. I'm not passing a judgment on anybody here. So now, one of those is 100% donation policy. Now, what does that actually mean, 100% donation? The general person would think, oh, I give, let's say, £20 of zakat money, or I give £200 of zakat money. All of that would go to the eligible person, or whatever. Yeah. So they will think that's how it basically works. Whereas when in the charity sector, it's quite different. So 100% donation will mean different things to different organizations. Yeah. So some people would exclude gift aid from it, for example. Yeah. Which I believe is technically part of your donation. I don't believe gift aid is not free money from the government, and we'll get to that in the next slide, inshallah. Yeah. So some people would completely knock off gift aid and not include that as part of your donation or as part of your zakat, and keep that separate and do other things with that. Others would do other things like, for example, you know, transfer fees. If your zakat money is basically coming in the millions, yeah, and you've got 11-12% transfer fee, you know, some may give it through lillah and things, no problem. Like I'm not judging anything, but it does seem quite unlikely that if your zakat money is in the millions, and then can you give, or especially if it's sadaqah and everything else is 100% donation policy, will all your transfer fees of the hundreds of thousands of pounds that are involved there, will it all come from another type of funding? it seems unlikely. And another one is when people go from one country to another, then they partner up with other organizations over there. So let's say you're going to somewhere like Uganda or Zimbabwe or Sudan or somewhere, then the organization in the UK that's 100% with this 100% donation policy, they partner up with an organization over there who's not 100% donation policy. So what happens over there? Things do get a little bit messy. So I would advise two things. One is for the lay people not to, be too concerned about this slogan, because if somebody doesn't use it, then don't assume they're doing something wrong, because generally they might be a bit more cautious about using that title or using that slogan because of the connotations or because of the kind of ripple effect that it's had. Now, what some people do is, obviously exclude the gift aid from it. So if you've given, let's say, £100, but that adds up to £125 or £112.50 or whatever it is. So they'll give you £100, but not your £12.50. They'll use that for their own things. Whereas other organizations, they wouldn't call themselves 100% donation policy. But what they would do is, let's say they take a 19% cut or a 20% cut or something from the core donation, but include the full gift aid that you've given. So if that's, another 25%, then is it 25% or 12.5% or whatever it was, they'll add that on to your core donation. So essentially 106% of your money would go to charity. So let's say you've given £100 and then there's £25 gift aid, but from that £100 it goes down to £81 because they've taken out, but your full gift aid is there. So you've got £106 of your money is going to charity. It was going to the eligible causes. So do they qualify as 100% donation? These types of organizations wouldn't call themselves 100% donation, but they're technically giving more money than a competitor, you could say. So things like that, I think we need to be careful of. And I would advise, those who work for charities not to use this, or if they do want to use this, then not to use it aggressively, not to use it in a way that implies other people are doing something wrong and I'm the only one who's doing something right. Yeah. And we have this in other sectors as well. Like let's say you're a Dawah organization, we are the ones calling Muslims and non-Muslims to Islam, and everybody else is doing something wrong, or without necessarily saying that. Or let's say you're monitoring meat and chicken being halal. You don't want to come across as though you're implying every other organization is doing something strange and dodgy. We have to be a bit ethical in how we go about things, and the charity sector is no different as well. So now gift aid, whose money is gift aid? It's not free money from the government. You can only give gift aid if you've paid tax to the UK government. Yeah? And if you look at their website, if you haven't paid enough tax, and you're basically selecting gift aid, but that amount of gift aid you haven't paid that much in tax, you're liable to cover the cost of that gift aid. Yeah. So clearly that is your money. It's your money that you've had to give to the government, and they're storing it for the betterment of society or whatever it is. And because you're engaging in a charitable act or philanthropic deed, you can select that. So from your tax money, this can go that way. Yeah. So it's essentially part of your donation. It's just like if a husband is given money on behalf of his wife or zakat on behalf of his wife. Yeah, it's like it technically somebody else's wealth, or like the wife has is basically got money that she doesn't have hold of, or whatever is going on, and somebody's paying on their behalf. The government is essentially keeping your wealth and my wealth and somebody else's wealth and everybody's wealth in a pot, and they use that for whatever they want to use it for. And if you're spending it on charitable deeds, you can claim it from that and give it to them, or essentially the charity organization will claim it on your behalf because you've selected it. Yeah. So really, it's your money, and that should be counted as part of it. So just like you can, you can pay zakat on behalf of your wife or something, you can technically, if you've got, let's say, £125 of zakat you need to give, you can technically donate £100 and click gift aid, or 120 or whatever it is, and click gift aid. So the total adds up to whatever you need to give. Yeah, technically you should be able to do that. However, I don't advise this because of how the current charity sector understand gift aid and what they do with gift aid. So I don't advise this kind of practice. But if people were using gift aid in the way that according to what gift aid really is, then in theory you should be able to do that. You should be able to give £100 and then add on your gift, or give £1,000, add your gift aid, and basically that's your total amount. So I think those who claim 100% donation policy, but they use their gift aid for admin costs or for advertising or for printing leaflets and for travel costs and for the food costs while they're traveling and things like that, it seems a bit unethical. Or maybe not unethical. I don't want to be too harsh, but it seems a bit of a questionable practice, at least in my opinion. That's not to say admin costs shouldn't be paid. I'm not saying that. We'll get to that as well. But all I'm saying is, charities shouldn't claim 100% donation without being clear what they mean by it, because everybody has a different definition for it. So now, regarding admin costs, let's go to those who administer them. Well, amilina alayha. This is a very important topic as well. Now, contemporary scholars. Now, before the contemporary scholars, let's talk about the past. What essentially happened is the Muslim state would, send out a group of people to various cities and villages to collect zakat from them, whether that's animals or that's money and whatever else, and they take it back to the central government, put it in the Beit al-Mal, or the royal treasury, whatever you want to call it, and everything else will go from there. So now those people who are going around collecting it, they are a category who the Quran accepts or mandates as eligible to receive zakat. Yeah. Now, obviously, there was difference of opinion. Like, how much do they take? Is it like a fixed amount, or is it a wage for the job that they're doing? Things like that. We don't need to go into that. What we do need to go into is what contemporary scholars say about this. So some say this is restricted to only those who are sanctioned by the Muslim state, or a caliph, a khalifa, essentially. And others say, no, this includes non-government officials as well, NGOs, or basically people in the charity sector. Yeah. Now, just some thoughts here. Yeah, that I can understand why people are hesitant about permitting NGOs from taking this kind of zakat money or taking a salary from the zakat money. However, what we do need to see is, number one, at the time of the Quran was revealed, we don't find this kind of distinction of government, non-government official, or the sultan have to give permission, things like that. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, we live in a post-caliphate world, and we can't forget this. This is literally an unprecedented time where in everything that we find in the fiqh books before us, or number one, I've not seen this in the fiqh book, but everything we do find in the fiqh books before us were at a time where we had a caliphate. Yeah. So even in things like Jumu'ah, for example, you open up a fiqh book about Jumu'ah, the very first thing you want to read is Jumu'ah is invalid unless it's done with the permission of the sultan, unless it's done with the permission of the caliph and the ruler. Yeah. So does that mean today, because ever since the Ottoman Empire was ended in the last century, for the last 100 years, everybody's Jumu'ah is invalid? We're not going to say that, because we're living in a post-caliphate world. These things have to be maintained for various other reasons. Yeah. So a lot of those kind of stipulations are redundant now. It's a moot point. So even if there was a distinction in the fiqh books about NGOs and non-NGOs, yeah, or government officials and non-government officials, then in a post-caliphate world, that still becomes a moot point. It still becomes redundant. Yeah. However, I can understand, people say, oh, we don't want people to abuse that category. Yeah. But then what's the alternative? That you're telling people, normal people, to be in charge of their own zakat. Can't they abuse that? Like, there's no governing body mandating or checking, have you paid your zakat, have you paid your zakat, and things like that. Can't they abuse that system as well? Yeah, so there's quite a few other things to think about. Now, even if, let's say, for those who say, because obviously I'm not going to criticize those who hold a different view, those who say, no, NGOs or people who work in the charity sector should not receive zakat money unless it's governed by the government, then that still doesn't mean that you can expect them to work for you for free. Yeah, you should still consider paying them, especially in modern day websites and things. They'll have add on £5 or £15 or whatever for admin costs or for whatever. You should voluntarily give that. If you believe that they shouldn't take the money and that particular charity doesn't pay that anyway, then at least pay some money for the logistic costs, because you're not going out there doing it yourself. You're not looking in the streets for Muslims who are eligible for zakat, but they're not telling you that they need zakat, or you have no idea, or you want to give it abroad to a different country. You're not physically going there and giving it to others. So essentially, you are using somebody else's labor. Contribute towards it. So I think ethically, we do need to think about these kind of things. But as there was no distinction in the past, it's like, and we're living in a post-caliphate world, maybe we should open up or leave this category open rather than closing it. Now, of course, we see zakat is more than just poverty alleviation. Yeah, as we've seen from the various categories, it's more than just the poor and needy. There are logistics that need to be met for this entire system to work. Yeah. Now, anybody who's worked in the industry, in the corporate world, anybody who's lived in, worked in a 9 to 5 and seen the financial sector and whatever, will understand this. Yeah. So, for example, essentially, what you need is we're not talking about donations in the charity sector. Yeah. For zakat, we're not talking about thousands of pounds. We're not talking about tens of thousands of pounds. We're talking about literal millions. Yeah, like 8 million pounds, 12 million pounds of just zakat money, let alone your sadaqah, let alone other types of donations. Yeah. So now you need people who are well versed in finance, or they can handle your money. They need to be qualified in accountancy to be able to handle large amounts of money in this way. Yeah. So there are good charities and things out there who are run by young passionate people who volunteers who want to do a really good do good work for the community. And mashallah, this is great, and I'm sure many of us are friends with such people as well. However, just because they're your friends or they're volunteering and they've good intentions and they're doing it for low wages or something, it doesn't mean they can handle, apologies if for any background noise here, it doesn't mean that they can handle millions of pounds, or they know how to manage it. Yeah. Whereas other people who are trained in accountancy or trained in Islamic finance or trained in mainstream, accountancy and economics and things like that, they have degrees in it, they have a professional job in it, they will be, better placed or better suited to handle this kind of money. So, for example, a mentor of ours, a scholar in Birmingham, Shaykh Shahin-ur Rahman from Ibn Rushd Center, he's published an academic paper last year in one of the Taylor and Francis journals on the zakat industry in the UK and tamlik and ownership and things like that. And he has a table there with some of the more famous charities and asking for stats about how much zakat money have you received in donations from 2011 to 2015. Yeah. So some couldn't show it for 2011, but they did show it from 2012 onwards. Some showed all of it, some didn't show it at all. So some of the more famous ones, the ones who have volunteers and underqualified people and well-intentioned people, they couldn't show any stats of from 2011 to 2015 how much is zakat money. Forget what you did with it, how much did you even receive in zakat money? They couldn't even show that. Whereas the other ones who tend to be criticized, these guys are getting too professional, or they're trying to do this or trying to do that, whatever. They can show you every penny of whatever they received from zakat money from 2011 onwards. So it's an important thing that we've got to consider as well, that there are logistics there. I would rather, if I'm paying zakat, I don't want it to be handled by people or what they're doing is just, printing leaflets and going around the mosques and giving out a Jummah or something. I'm not in no way am I undermining the work that people are doing. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept everyone's great work and forgive us for any, any sort of adab about them if it comes across in that way. Whereas, I would be more comfortable if somebody's getting paid a proper wage, a proper salary for doing essentially what's an accountant's job, and to do what's, handling money in the right way and ensure everything is going the right places and not being misused. And they can show, when asked, they can show exactly where every penny has gone to. Yeah. So again, even if you believe they shouldn't be paid from zakat money, at least pay them from other types of fund. So of course, people have every right to opt out and not take part in this, but you can go and distribute zakat yourself. But this entire system, it can't be belittled. If you want a job well done, then you're gonna have to pay for it accordingly. Yeah, that's just a fact of life. Whether that's in any discipline, you're gonna have to pay for the system. But the way the system works, and that requires logistics and admin costs and all these, equipment and so many other things involved, I don't think it should be belittled in this way. So we'll end on this, inshallah. It's a quote from I found on National Zakat Foundation. Zakat is a pillar of Islam, and as such, it works together with the other 4 pillars. I think this is a beautiful quote to put zakat into the context, or in the wider context of Islam. So, Jazakumullah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this gathering of us, and I pray it's been beneficial. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to act upon this, and may He forgive any mistakes that I may have made. So I'll close with the presentation now, and we'll go to the questions. So I apologize, it has gone quite late. I'll get to all the questions, inshallah, or as much as we can before Maghrib. Those of you who do need to go, feel free to leave, inshallah. I'll just get straight to the questions. The first one is anything under 87 grams of gold forgiven? So do we need to give zakat for under 87 grams? If you have less than 87 grams of gold, or under 600 and something grams of silver, but your cash money is above the threshold, your cash money is backed against gold, is priced against gold anyway. Yeah. So what you have to do is that gold, the price of that, you count it on top of your cash money or your bank balance and things like that, and you pay accordingly. If you have less than 87 grams of gold and less than 600 grams of silver, and you do not have the threshold that makes zakat necessary altogether, so you've got your cash, you've got your gold, everything together, it still doesn't add up to £4,000, then no, you don't have to pay zakat on it. Next question is, can you silver nisab for general zakat, and for udhiyah and qurbani switch to gold nisab? I don't advise this. I haven't really thought about this before, but generally you would have to stay consistent. Whatever you choose, it has ramifications, it has consequences. Otherwise, that's kind of like asking, can you pay zakat according to silver, but yet receive sadaqah money from somewhere else? Like, it has, if you stick with one, you stick with one. Yeah, it's kind of like the timetable about, fasting, suhoor, 18 degrees or 15 degrees timetable. If you stick to one for suhoor and eating, then you should stick to that for fajr as well. Otherwise, you can't do something like, I'll pray my fajr after 18 degrees, but I'll carry on eating suhoor until 15 degrees. It's like you've prayed your fajr, but you're still eating suhoor, and it'll end up in a mess. So you can't do something like that. So here, I would be cautious against advising that. I haven't thought about it enough, but at face value, I don't have a positive inclination towards it. What is the difference between scrap gold and brand new gold in relation to zakat? Which one should we be paying? So scrap gold is the price that gold is basically valued at. That's the one that you will go by when paying. So if you Google scrap gold now, you'll find it'll be £48 and 1 pence of today's money. So if you buy brand new gold, if you mean jewelry, then of course jewelry's pricing will be different from the actual gold. Yeah. So so if you get a ring, for example, and that ring might cost you £15, £20, or even a few £100s, whether it's gold or silver, obviously accordingly. Silver will be cheaper, gold will be more expensive, but the actual the silver itself would be a lot cheaper. So what you're paying for is not just the silver or not just the gold, but you're paying for the actual jewelry itself. So brand new gold, in terms of the value of gold, it shouldn't be any different from older gold. So scrap gold is basically what you're going to pay it on. If you have a relative in the UK who is unable to work due to a medical condition but have a little saving, can you give them zakat? It completely depends on if they're eligible for zakat or not, and the different madhabs will have different, definitions of that. Different organizations will understand this differently. In theory, I'm just going to give a generic answer. However, for specific situations, please contact your local scholars or contact scholars you trust, because there needs to be a bit more detail than this. There's not enough detail here. So I would say, in theory, if they are eligible to receive zakat, yeah, and their saving is less than what makes them, they have to pay zakat, and their money isn't basically enough for them, it doesn't suffice their living costs for their day-to-day life, then in theory, yes, you can give them zakat. Now, of course, if they're your relatives, in that you can't give it to your husband, for example. You can't give it to zakat to your wife. Yeah, and in some schools, the wife can give it to the husband, but not the other way around, and things like that happens. You can't give it to your parents or your children and things like that. But if you've got a cousin somewhere, if you've got a brother somewhere, if you've got a distant family somewhere else, then in theory, so long as all the criteria are met, you can pay them zakat, even in the UK. This is why we focus on a lot of all the other things, because it has ramifications. in the UK itself, let alone elsewhere. So I thought it's quite important to speak about this, because poverty rates in the UK, especially within the Muslim community, is very, very high. If you know a widow in the UK who has 2 10-year-old boys, can you give them zakat even if they receive benefits and the husband left a little savings? It completely depends on if they're eligible for it or not. So receiving benefits will, I don't know how much that costs, and is it enough for them? Is it, if the husband left them a little savings, how much is that little savings? Is it going to, look after them for the whole year and things like that? If it does cover, let's say 2 or 3 years worth of, let's say there's left like, £20,000 or something, then they may not be able to receive zakat at the moment, but in the future they may be eligible for zakat. Or if that little saving is insignificant and it's not, catering for their needs and for the 2 boys' needs, then in theory they will be able to pay zakat. But again, it depends on madhabs have an issue. Madhabs will have different views here, and different zakat organizations will have different views here as well. So feel free to speak to somebody more specifically, because the details, the devil is in the details, as always. Sorry, maybe that's not the best expression. The details matter essentially. If one has enough wealth to reach nisab, is zakat payable on everything above the nisab, or from the nisab and above? Everything, from everything. So let's say they've got £5,000, yeah, of wealth, of everything, deducting all the bills and debts and whatever, and the zakat is due from 4,200. You pay zakat on the full 5,000, not on £800. Yeah, not on £800. You pay on all of it. So if one pays zakat on deductible expenses, is that a sin? No, it's not a sin. It's completely fine to pay more zakat than is due to you, than just due upon you. Or does the intention need to be different? Intention doesn't need to be different. It can be a sadaqah. Is that this much is zakat and this much is sadaqah? It's generally good practice to round up your zakat anyway, just to cover for any miscalculations or things that might have happened, or you might have, a bit of money, in your pocket somewhere that you forgot about, or in an envelope that you kept somewhere that you forgot about, and just to cover all of those, it's generally good practice to round up your zakat. So if you do pay more than that, it's not a sin at all. However, if you do want to clarify this much is zakat and this much is sadaqah, no problem, that's completely fine as well. Can the person receive zakat if they own a lot of land but have no income? Okay, so in the Hanafi school, technically they can't receive zakat. In other schools, they will be able to receive zakat. So this completely depends on specific cases. I won't be able to. It's not actually just about income, because if they have a lot of money but they don't have income, then they won't pay zakat. They still have to pay zakat. Sorry. So if you're a millionaire but you've retired and I don't need to work anymore, I don't have any rental income from all these properties, but I'm a millionaire, then you're still gonna have to pay zakat. So it depends. Do you have to pay zakat on student loans? This one is a really big discussion for various reasons, and I don't have the answer to it, because I personally wasn't involved in. I didn't have to take I was fortunate enough not to take out a student loan for my university program, so I don't fully understand how it works, what it is. Do you have all these grants and all these other things, and then it's the nature of it, like when you have to pay it back and things like that. Let's say it is according to the mainstream anyway, because there are views of the student loan doesn't technically fulfill the definition of a loan, therefore number one, is permissible to take, and it's not riba involved, and number two, it'll have like other consequences. But for those who say no, it is an actual loan, then it won't be permissible to take because of riba, or those who permit it based on necessity or whatever, that will happen. But yes, in theory, if it's an actual loan, then it's more of you're technically in debt, so you can deduct that. You wouldn't need to pay money on a debt. However, if somebody considers it to be haram, then if you're in a haram debt, then what happens there and things like that. I don't have a coherent answer for this, just because there's I have thought about it a little bit, but there's a lot of unanswered questions, and because I don't have an entire set of all the consequences of that, I don't have answers to all of them, so I'm not comfortable having a formal opinion on this. So in theory, I would say if it's a student loan and you are paying it back and things like that, you would have to you wouldn't pay zakat on it. But there's caveats with that. One who has debts but has savings, as given in the example, £15,000 savings, doesn't pay zakat if the debt is £30,000. Why is that? Is it assumed they'll use the 15k savings to pay off some of the debt? It's because the Quran, number one, permits it. So those who are in debt, yeah, of course, you have a commitment. You have to pay off your debt. So the Quran permits those who are in debt, they can receive zakat, of course, for the obvious reason of paying that off. So yes, if somebody's balance is in the minus, so let's say in this example, £15,000, they have £30,000 they've got in debt, technically their balance is in the minus. They don't have the threshold of £4,200 to pay zakat in the first place. So it's not wajib upon them because they simply don't have that money. So yes, that 15k or £15,000 technically belongs to somebody else, and they're using somebody else's money to live their life. And that's essentially how a loan or debt works. If one is in debt but receives rent from a house that he uses for his income, will he pay zakat on that house? You wouldn't pay zakat on the house, even if you're wealthy and you've got a buy-to-let mortgage kind of thing. You'll pay zakat only on the income of the house, not the house itself. Whereas if you buy a house with the intention to sell it, then you'll pay zakat on the entire house. Here is if somebody is in debt but he's got the income, it'll depend on after that debt, is his income still above £4,000? Does he have surplus money or surplus savings? If he does, then you have to pay zakat. If he doesn't, then he should pay off his debt first and then work upwards. Could you confirm, are relatives or family entitled to zakat first before other needy people? Yes, they are. In general, zakat or sadaqah and charity begins at home. This is an Islamic principle. فَبْدَأْ بِعِيَالِكَ, the Prophet ﷺ said, begin with your family. So yes, تُؤْخَذُ مِنْ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ وَتُرَدُّ فِي فُقَرَائِهِمْ. It's taken from their wealthy and given to their poor. So it's generally within your own people, within your own family, within your own locality and things like that. Of course, if there's like an urgency somewhere else, then that would be a different situation. But in terms of the hierarchy, those who are closest and nearest and dearest to you, they have more of a right to your zakat than outsiders essentially. But if you do give it to other people, then it's completely valid, and that you've done nothing wrong essentially. Can you give zakat to poor immediate brothers and sisters back home? They can work, but they can't find work, or they're lazy. If they are eligible for it, then yes, to brothers and sisters, you can give zakat. You can give zakat to your brothers and sisters, regardless of their reason. But if they're eligible for it, they're eligible for it. There's a direct message here. Can you give zakat to a stepfather for a stepson? So the son's dad passed away and the new dad now has income coming in. The mother doesn't have any financial support except from the husband she's now with. They are not from the UK. If the stepfather is earning and his needs are being met, and he doesn't meet the criterion to receive zakat in any of the madhabs, then in the Hanafi school, the bar is even lower. So what happens is you don't even need money. If you've got excess items and luxury things that add up to the amount of Nisab, then you can't receive zakat. Even if you don't need to pay zakat, you can't receive zakat. In the other schools, it's about kifaya. It's about, is it doing you, basically? So this will completely depend. If the stepfather is earning money, then in theory, he wouldn't be eligible for zakat, but it'll completely depend. Also, can zakat be given to someone who's in debt of a previous business, not running now? The person now has another running business, but he can't afford to pay off the debt. The wife is financially well, but she said she can't pay off her husband's debt. They are not in the UK. Can she pay his debt with a valid reason? If there are reasons she can't pay off, well, what are these reasons, if you know? Okay, this person can receive zakat to pay it off, and the wife, if she says she can't pay, then how can she pay? I'm not understanding the question, unless she means she's not allowed to pay, but she's allowed to pay off her husband's debt. She's allowed to. She doesn't have to, because you don't need to take on somebody else's burden. And the wife can even give the husband zakat as well, at least in some schools. I can't remember what the Hanafi position is here. Or if not zakat, then even sadaqah, or even any other types as well. So if they've asked for zakat to pay off the debt, in theory that'll be permissible. But of course, if this is a very specific situation, then please speak to a scholar about the specific situation, because these things, the details can really change an entire situation. Can you give zakat to people in the UK just on benefits, like divorcee or separated with kids? If they're eligible for it, then absolutely yes, you can. If they're not eligible for it, then you can't. Again, the details matter here. So do you pay zakat on a bank loan, as technically that's not a saving and you have to pay back? If it's a loan and you have to pay a loan back, so you're essentially in debt, then you don't pay zakat back on your debt. You can deduct that from your total net worth. So people often think that zakat is to be given only on money saved or earned from the past year only, not on the entire wealth. So just to address that, okay, yeah, so zakat is paid annually. So what happens is, once you've met your nisab, so let's say you've been given money from the sky today on the 24th of Ramadan, and now you've got £5,000 and zakat is fard on you. It's not fard on you yet, it's fard on you next year. So next year, once you've had that for an entire year, then you pay on the total wealth that you have at that time, so long as it's still above the nisab threshold. Now after that, every single year after, on the same date, you're going to continue paying zakat, or at least that date is how much zakat you're going to give. Whether you give that in advance or you give that later is a different story, but that's the date that you calculate it by. So in terms of fluctuations and things, you'll calculate on the 24th of Ramadan every year, but you don't calculate, you don't count whatever you've given zakat already, whatever money you've paid zakat of already before, you don't deduct that, you count that as part of it. So even if you've got the same £5,000 next year and you've not gained anything, you've not lost anything, or apart from the zakat that you've paid, basically, you'll still pay on everything. So it's a recurring payment, it's a recurring charity, not it's not a lifetime one. It's not like you've paid this £5,000 worth of zakat 1 year and that's it, I don't need to keep paying it. No, it's an annual obligation. Some believe back home Maulana's families are entitled for zakat, or not entitled for zakat, although they are very poor. So my own relatives who come from Maulana families were excluded. What's your opinion? Well, okay, they're an odd situation here, bizarre situation, but being a Maulana doesn't have any bearing on whether you can take zakat or not take zakat. Yeah. So in some underdeveloped countries, people do have strange understanding or strange, thoughts about Islam. You could say strange opinions that, and they make the Maulana's life, they make the Imam's life as miserable as they possibly can. They want to underpay them, they want to mock them, they want to make fun of them, all sorts of things. So yeah, just because you're a Maulana or you're a family of a Maulana, it doesn't mean you're not eligible for zakat. But of course, I would also advise that those who don't need to take zakat, then it's better you don't receive zakat as a scholar and things, because people will look down at you and people will think they own you. They'll start treating you like a slave, and it has other types of consequences. But if they are eligible for it, then they can take it. What forbids? There's still quite a lot of questions and we're going to have to leave soon, so I apologize if I can't get through everybody's questions. What forbids those who administer it to pay themselves a huge salary? Well, nothing essentially. So there's nothing that forbids that. So of course you could think, oh, hold on, this is prone to abuse, but you could say that about anything afterwards. So like that, I don't find that a very good argument, because it's not our job to police what people do and how they do it. If the Quran is permitted it, the Quran is permitted it. If the Quran is kept it vague, it's kept it vague for a reason. Yeah. So when you have a lot of these types of things where people do get into the nitty-gritty of things, miss the forest for the trees, and start behaving like what Surah Al-Baqarah essentially condemns. We don't want to do things like that. So if the Quran keeps it vague for a reason, that it becomes adaptable in all times and places. Islam is dynamic and is there to cater for all cultures and contexts. So if people do abuse it, then they're wrong for abusing that. Yeah. And if you don't want your money to go towards it, then just don't pay to that charity. pay it somewhere else. So, you know, obviously people do need to be kept in check, of course. There does need to be a accountability. But then you could say that with, what about, let's say you have an Islamic government and legitimate Islamic state, and the caliph, you know, all his family members, let's say, are given all this, and they take millions of pounds of zakat as their salary, then you know what happens there. So you know, the system can be open to abuse, but it doesn't mean you're allowed to do that abuse. And number two, the people shouldn't take zakat themselves. What would happen is there will be a fixed amount that the people who run it, or the CEO or whoever the accountant is, they'll give them a salary of whatever the salary is. And charities who do opt for this, they're public with how much they take. So, for example, I believe it's the National Zakat Foundation. They said their staff get £27,000 a year. That's how much they pay their staff, which is, you know, it's just under than national average wage or salary in the UK. So people should be transparent about this. Charity sector should be completely transparent. If somebody isn't transparent and they are you know, have unethical conducts, then you can report them to the Charity Commission. There are ways about it. So you could say essentially the Charity Commission can hold them to standard, but not necessarily, because Charity Commission lets you have a high salary and things. But again, huge salary, what is a huge salary? This is quite subjective. And, you know, a lot of people think that people who engage in religion or religious work, they should only be paid the legal minimum wage because they don't deserve anything more than that. So that's another extreme on the other side, which is completely, you know, wrong. So the huge salary is very, very subjective, and we shouldn't really do that. So I'm confused. The gift aid is money that one had paid or will be paying to the government for government taxes. By clicking gift aid, and just those money, it will not in any circumstances be available to the individual for their own wealth. Okay, but I don't see what the question is here. But you can use it for, you know, if you're doing it, using it in a charitable cause, and you click that, so it goes to the other cause, it's still coming from your money, your donation. And if you haven't paid enough, you are liable to pay the surplus amount. So I don't see the issue here. Is it only Muslims are eligible for zakat? Yes, only Muslims can receive zakat. So if somebody's, can it go? So it cannot go to, for example, to a poor person who is not Muslim. No, but you can give them sadaqah. You can give sadaqah to poor non-Muslims. Just a couple more questions left, and we'll leave, inshallah. Can you give zakat to an animal charity? No, you can't. As far as I understand, no, you can't. Only those 8 categories are eligible. However, animal charities, you can give them sadaqah. Will we be able to have access to the presentation slides? Yes, inshallah, the admin will email it to everybody. And I believe we've reached it, inshallah. So jazakumullah khair, everybody. And let's go, because it's Maghrib time, or nearly Maghrib time. Brother Abdul Hay.
Jazakallah khair for that, I pray that, you know, everyone has benefited, inshallah. We are a bit tight for time, so apologies for that, but Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah is very, very thorough in the explanation, mashallah. So, you know, my du'as are for you, and inshallah, I request everyone to make dua for the Shaykh as well, for giving up his time for this very beneficial zakat course. So Jazakallah khair for that.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.